Anshuman, very excited to be talking to you, and congratulations on the launch of Terra.do. This is a very powerful, unique venture that you've started on climate change. Tell us what you are doing with Terra.do.
No, Shradha, so what we're building is an online platform for people who want to solve for climate change, which is one of the most uh, problematic major challenges that humankind faces right now. And what we've built is basically an online school that takes people, talented people all across the planet, and ramps them up very quickly in everything climate, and then gets them to work on some of the hardest problems out there in climate that use their skills. And we just graduated our first cohort, some amazing 20 people, and we are hoping to go from strength to strength from there.
It's an online school?
Yeah, it's an online school. So maybe if it works, I can give you some genesis of where this is all
Yeah,
coming from.
please,
Because
please, of course.
yeah,
Yeah.
okay, sure. Yeah, so my own background has been mostly as an internet entrepreneur, starting and selling multiple companies. And last, I was chief product officer at MakeMyTrip and GoIBibo. And then I think it's true for a lot of us. We have that moment of epiphany, especially when kids are born, when you start looking at the planet around you and realizing that we had taken it for granted that they will obviously inherit a better world. And with the more I looked into this about a year ago, the more worried I got. And this had been something which has been an anxiety for a long time. So in the process, ended up speaking to maybe 200 plus people all across, and everything from deep tech, nuclear fusion, all the way to environmental justice and everything in between. And two things stood out to me. One was that I was not alone. There were many, many more people like me who were out there very worried about what was happening with the climate and struggling to figure out how to get into that space to use their skills. And the second was, if you look at what is needed uh, in the next 10 years, we're talking about fundamentally transforming how we do energy, how we do agriculture, manufacturing, construction, transportation, and not just in economies like US, but as diverse as US and India and everything in between.
Yeah.
So, and yet the number of people who are working in white collar climate jobs is maybe 500,000. And
Yeah.
yet you're talking about a transformation of the world's GDP, world's economy, which is unprecedented in human history. So that was kind of one of the impetus to say, well, it's not going to be solved by 500,000 people. You'll probably need 100 million people to be working on climate over the next 10 years. And to me, 100 million of anything is either the government or the internet. I don't profess to know the former. I know a little bit about the latter. So we said, let's figure out how we can build an internet platform that can bring 100 million people into climate work. And our school is just the starting point for that.
Who are the people who can apply, and what are some of the ways in which people can contribute, join, participate in what you're doing?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And by the way, I do want to make sure that everyone who's watching understands that this is also a historical, unprecedented opportunity for large businesses to come up. And so what you're talking about is roughly $20 trillion of complete refactoring of the world's economy. And there has to be ways to make money in that. There has to be ways to bring impact. It's one of those very unusual intersections of both money and impact that I think is happening here. Now, and just to answer your question, I think I'll just tell you a little bit about our first cohort itself. So we had someone who is a partner at Techstars, which is actually the world's largest technology accelerator. And his reason for joining the program was because he wanted to get Techstars to focus a lot more on sustainability and climate tech investing. So this program was giving him kind of this landscape overview. We had someone else who started one of the largest online coding boot camps in the world called Hack Reactor. And he's an entrepreneur and he wanted to build something in climate. Now, going from an online coding boot camp and ending up where he did, which is that at the end of the program, he ended up starting a green hydrogen company, which is a very specific hyper niche inside the climate world. So if you're entrepreneurial and you want to start a business in this space, this is a great way to get that landscape overview. But at the other end, by the way, we also have this lady from India who had been with CNN for 15 years as an investigative journalist. And she had been troubled by the fact that a lot of the stories that she was writing had this environmental degradation as an underpinning of that. And she wanted to zoom out and understand what was going on. And this program was giving her that overview. We had someone else who was the youngest ever ITN, who was chief of staff at a electric vehicle company in India, has ambitions to start his own company or go work for someone else who's building a large transformational business. So as you can see, it's a very eclectic mix of people. I think what it's a sweet spot might be people who are a few years out in their career. More importantly, people who are almost 6 months into their research and active listening and thinking about the climate space would find this program most useful, because this is not a Coursera, Udemy kind of a course that you take and you put on your resume. It's a boot camp. So the idea is that you graduate, and within a couple of months, we want you to be working in climate in some shape and form, as an entrepreneur, as an employee somewhere, as somebody who's taking their job and putting a very strong climate lens onto it.
You're not based in India right now, right?
Well, so that's the funny thing, which is that I was in India, in Bangalore, until 2 months back, and
Huh.
then we took one of these evacuation flights to be back here at in the Bay Area in Stanford, actually on the campus. So my wife has been a PhD student here for the past 2 years, and we were actually trying to build a company that was remote from day one. And this is pre-COVID times. Of obviously after COVID, everyone says like, "What's a big deal with that?" We're also remote, but we are a completely remote team. In fact, I have two co-founders, of which my climate co-founder I've never met in real life. And the story
Huh.
goes that back in the day, I was sitting at a cafe in Bangalore when, like back in the good times when people could sit in cafes and talking about climate change to someone, and a stranger walked up to me and said, "Look, you should talk to my sister-in-law." So the sister-in-law lives in Hawaii, and she's a climate expert, and she's taught climate change at Oxford for many years. So that's how we have quote unquote met. But here we are building out a company essentially, and you know how startups are, right? We're essentially committing to I don't know, almost a decade plus of
Yeah.
being together, and entirely on Zoom. And so far, so good.
If you could share the seed investors that you have on board.
So, Shradha, one thing, I mean, as you can see, I've been a repeat entrepreneur. And to me, what was really important was that this venture is quite unusual in many ways. And the biggest way it is going to be unusual is that we are still seeking product market fit. We have some great insight into what might be important, but climate is, I mean, no one even defines this as an industry right now. So to
Yeah.
me, the kind of capital that I needed was very patient capital, which has had a bit of a mission. They had to be very savvy investors. I didn't want people who were just like giving money to me because they had spare change. But these are individuals who I would love to have their operating background, their investing background be useful for something like this. And that's why we were keen to not get any institutional capital at this stage, because this would have been too early.
Yeah.
And so therefore, it's literally 30 angels. Ashish is one of them. But we're lucky to have people like Dipinder Goyal at Zomato, Deep Kalra at MakeMyTrip, of course, Amit Gupta at Yulu, Mekin Maheshwari, who used to be at CPO at Flipkart, and a bunch of other names that you would recognize. Stanford Angels from India. Stanford Angels India is kind of a big investor as well. Individuals coming in under that umbrella. So we are very keen on getting these kind of individuals who are who have a passion for environment/climate and have the patience to let us experiment a lot in this space over the next 12 to 18 months.
Tell me, are there any other players in the market in the world? Because for me, I think I'm hearing this for the first time.
Yeah, so there are a couple of small things. And see, so for example, there is a program on edX, and that is taught by a professor at Harvard. It's a great program, except it's very science focused.
Mm,
Then the UN has something which is
mm,
out there, but which is very policy focused. So there's hardly anything being done by any scale internet player in this space right now. And by the way, that might entirely be because, well, this is too small for anyone to bother. We think it's different. We think the amount of climate awareness that has come in the past couple of years, and if you multiply that by the fact that climate catastrophes are just going to multiply,
yeah.
unfortunately, they can just increase much more, means that there is this massive trend that's going to come. You can look at that in the Fortune 500 companies. So every day, it seems like a new company comes up. Apple just did that 3 days back. Microsoft did that a year back, where they announced that they're going to be carbon neutral or carbon negative by 2030. And these are massive companies who can shake up supply chains. There's BlackRock, for example, which is the world's largest asset manager. And as you can imagine, a world's largest asset manager will not be swayed by just fuzzy emotions about saving the environment or saving the polar bear. They've gone back and said, look, we manage $7 trillion of assets, and we see climate as the biggest risk to our portfolio right now.
Yeah.
So from here on, we are going to invest and divest based on whether our companies understand this risk and they have factored that in or not. And that has shaken up the investment industry altogether. So we think there's a massive wave coming in this, and there's going to be lots of things that will be required. Capital is definitely one of them, but so is talent, and we're hoping that we
Yeah.
can be that place which will take all that talent and bring it to climate.
Yeah, and also talent, and also what you are doing is actually creating evangelists, actual evangelists, which are beyond the social media, plugs that we see that we have to save the climate, right? Like these people will, after the course,
Yeah.
they will be actually talking, living, and championing the climate change.
No, I mean, and I must say that uh, climate had been kind of. I mean, we first talked about this almost 30 years back when climate seemed to be an issue. I mean, we've been talking about climate as a problem 30 years ago when one of the NASA scientists made a presentation to the Congress. But after that, I mean, Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth came out, and everyone was kind of scandalized for a bit. But then after that, the move, I mean, there hasn't really been that much action if you look at it. I mean, we've been talking about climate accords after climate accords. And if you look at the biggest hope that we have seen in this space right now are the teenage activists. So someone like a Greta Thunberg coming
Yeah,
out and talking about climate and talking in a language that nobody really had seen before, which is a language of a sense of entitlement and a sense of disgust at how we adults have completely ruined the world. And so that's, I think, has completely shaken up people. So to me, the social media activism has a very important place to play.
yeah, yeah.
And frankly, I mean, this
That's
is one of those problems. I mean, it literally, no pun intended, touches everything under the sun.
yeah.
And we need any
Fair
and
point.
all
Yeah,
kinds of people to
yeah.
be pitching in now.
So first batch is done. When is your next batch starting?
Actually, in 10 days' time.
And how do people apply? Have is it do people you already have people in the batch, or people can still apply?
No, people can still apply. We have applications open until another week from now.
Okay.
So all the way till April to August 16th. And we're actually especially keen on India. Last time we had about 40% of our cohort was from India. And both my co-founders and myself have a passion for India being an important part of the solution and an important part of our business. Even though if you look from a revenue standpoint, it may or may not be the most important, but it's very evident if you look at climate action
Yeah.
that if we do not manage to figure out what India's trajectory looks like over the next 10 years, then the efforts of the rest of the world will be moot. And India has actually a very different problem also. I mean, and maybe if I can just spend 2 minutes talking about that. So if you look at the world, in general, the world thinks in terms of carbon, right? And they talk about carbon reduction, carbon capture, sucking out carbon from the atmosphere, and so on, which is all very important. India's footprint right now in terms of carbon is not that large because we are still a middle income country. It'll obviously become bigger over 10 years' time, but I don't see that as the number one problem, to be honest. What I see as the number one problem for India is a problem of social justice, which is you have 200 million people living on the Indian coastlines. You have
Yeah.
400 million people still dependent on the monsoons, which are going to get disrupted by climate change. In fact, there's a very interesting study by Stanford, which said that India's GDP is in the past 30 years is already one third lower than what it would have been had climate change not happened. And yet, if you look at, I mean, when we think about climate in India, we think of it as the pollution in Delhi,
Yeah.
right? Which is a small subset of it. We never
Yeah.
see it as a employment and livelihood issue. We don't see
Yeah.
it as a poverty issue. And that's the thing which I feel very passionately about, that we have to get that right very quickly, or the human loss from climate in India is going to be many fold. And this is despite the fact that India is not even the largest contributor by a long stretch to the problem historically and even now.